Welcome to VoteProPot-Cast, the award-winning cannabis news podcast brought to you by VoteProPot.com. Here are your hosts, Phil Adams, Jay Britton, and Andrew McCreadies.
Congress quietly guts some popular cannabis reforms. Why did Canada's cannabis bubble burst? We'll talk about that. And pot stocks. We'll give you what to look for in the coming year. We've got all this and some other stuff for you. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode. We're really glad to have you with us. This is the first, this is actually our second one of the new year.
It's our first, bro.
It's the first one of the new year?
Well, because the last show was New Year's Eve, yeah. So technically.
All right.
Happy 2020, everybody.
Happy 2020, everybody. We're going to get right into it. Congress is just silently shelving several cannabis reforms despite a lot of popular support. Andrew, you've got some information on that, right?
Yeah, the House of Representatives attempted to pass cannabis reform this month by attaching riders to the spending bill for the fiscal 2020 year. But as it turns out, the Republican-held Senate took out a few clauses. One was the banking bill. One was the protection for veterans. And another one was the double down on D.C., making sure they can't spend any money to establish a recreational, an adult use market. So they shot that in the foot. And they also shot down what the protection against state-regulated businesses from federal prosecution.
Yeah.
So as it stands, I think it still kind of protects legal medical marijuana practices, but it doesn't protect anyone else. So now they can spend federal money to go after adult use dispensaries and growers.
So is this our friend Crapo?
Yeah. Well,
Crapo. Sounds like one of the Marx brothers, you know?
I know, right? Yeah. Well, he's the Senate
Harpo, Chico, Groucho, and Crapo.
Yeah, he's the chairman of the banking committee, and he's the one that wants to impose a 2% THC cap on all cannabis products. It's crazy. This guy's nuts.
Right. And the veterans things, I mean, if you either, I guess, have a card or work in the industry, they're like, oh, good luck getting a home loan through the Veterans Administration, or good luck, I guess they're balking at some of their other, benefits that veterans absolutely earned and deserve.
Absolutely.
So I think this is the beginning of what we talked about the last show. I mean, this is the Blitzkrieg. This is the Battle of the Bulge.
That's
the
right.
anti-people, they were quiet. They came in stealth. They passed all this stuff, and now they're going to double down this year. They're going to come out like banshees against reform.
So, folks out there, we got to come out like bigger banshees.
That's right.
You need to get involved, stay informed, know who these people are and what their stances are, and contact them. Get in their faces a little bit, in a nice and civilized and, American way, but, let them know how you feel. And one way you can do that is go to VoteProPot.com, check out our Take Action page, and there's all kinds of ways that you can, and resources for you to get involved and make your voice heard about this stuff.
Yep. Well, there are a number of pro-cannabis bills passed by the House with bipartisan support, and now they're all just sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk, just collecting dust.
Yeah, well, that and 500,000 other.
Yeah, there's a lot of legislation
bills that get stalled in and to some degree, that's kind of what the Senate has always done. It's been described as kind of the saucer in which the heat of the moment cools off. And you kind of put the brakes on things so people don't so Congress doesn't rush into legislation in the heat of the moment. But come on, man, after a while, do something, even if it's wrong.
Yeah, I'm coming over, 2/3 of the United States believes that cannabis should be legalized for adult use. And over 90% believe it should be medically legal. I mean, it's ridiculous that these people are fighting it. I mean,
Well, they are clinging to the old attitudes, and that's why we're here, folks, is to dispel those old attitudes, because they're wrong. They're just wrong.
Thank you for joining us for Vote Pro Podcast. If you enjoy the show, we'd love to hear from you. Send us your thoughts at VoteProPot.com/contact or send us an email at podcast@VoteProPot.com, and please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to be part of the show, call our message line at 240-257-2441. Tell your friends about us and be sure to like, follow and share us on social media. Just go to Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter and do a search for Vote Pro Pot. Now, back to the boys.
So we have some other news north of the border from our own Jay Britton. Jay, what do you got, man?
Well, I'm looking at an article by Robin Levinson King from the BBC News in Toronto, and I thought it was interesting, and it kind of segues into stuff we've talked about here having to do with the stock market and the industry in general. Of course, we have 100% legalization in Canada. So this article is about why, with 100% legalization, did the cannabis bubble burst? In other words, why are the stocks dropping like crazy? And Robin Levinson King gives a couple of possible reasons. First, some background. Stocks exploded. I mean, went nuts with legalization in Canada. But, a lot of analysts now are saying, much like the internet bubble and the real estate bubble in the 90s and so forth, people were putting their money on a fantasy rather than on the fundamentals. They're not looking. Phil, you've talked about this. They're not looking at the fundamentals of the stock. And to give you some background numbers, in May of 2018, Canada producer, their largest, Canopy Growth, made headlines when it became the first marijuana company to list on the New York Stock Exchange. 6 months later, the stock price about doubled when it hit $52 a share.
Wow. Currently,
the stock is back where it started, back at 28 or something. So, those who got in at 52 were kind of screwed. So the reason is why. What caused that, and how can we look at that in the United States as an investor? Because I think all of us have looked at cannabis stocks. I have. And there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Competition with the black market is obviously the big thing. We've talked about that a ton. It's estimated that 75% of cannabis users are still using the black market to get their weed. And that's both in Canada and the U.S., surprisingly.
Yeah,
it's the same.
You would think more in the U.S. than in Canada, but no.
Yeah, and so why? Well, the why is we've talked about too. It's taxes, regulation, and the cost. So here's some numbers for you. This is pertaining to Canada. The retail price of legal cannabis has gone up from about $214 an ounce, or $7.50 or so a gram, in October of 2018 to $232 an ounce in last July, according to statistics in Canada. So from $214 to $232 an ounce, it's gone up. That doesn't sound too bad, right?
Well, it's a 10% increase thereabout.
But meanwhile, the illegal prices dropped from $142 an ounce to $123. So now you're looking at numbers. To go into a retail establishment in Canada and buy an ounce is $230, give or take. You can buy it on the street for $125. What are you going to do? It's obvious. And we're having the same issue here in the U.S. And the other thing is, a lot of it can be, and if you talk to the analysts, a lot of it has to do with growing pains. This is a whole new environment, a whole new industry, really, being the legal part of it. Obviously, the industry's been around a long time. So you've got things like overproduction where they're still shaking, and you can't blame really the government or on this. They're still trying to figure out, like, how many licenses do we give out? How many growers do we need? What's the demand going to be? All these things are going to shake themselves out over a period of time. It's not going to happen in the first year. So in September, Canadians bought 25,800 pounds of dried flower in Canada, but producers had a total of 165,000. So, do the math. Almost 26,000 pounds purchased, 165 of finished product that's ready for sale with nowhere to go.
So what are you going to glut on the market?
You're going to have to turn it into oil. You're going to have to do something with it because it has a shelf life. Let's face it. So anyway, that's kind of the gist of it. And I think that very much equates to what we're seeing in the U.S., don't you guys think? I mean, it's the same kind of thing. Stocks have really kind of plummeted in 2019. Mm-hmm. So the question is there room for them to go up in 2020?
Well, I think part of the problem is in the cannabis industry is it sounds great. It's really enticing, but it's kind of moving at a snail's pace. Mm-hmm. So people, I want to get in and make all this money and go, well, it's going to take some time because not only, so it sounds like a great idea, but then they're heavily taxed, overly regulated. They can't depreciate anything off the taxes.
Right. That's another thing.
And then the black market is giving them a run for their money. And it's the value of these companies isn't what they thought it would be.
Well, and again, it's the understanding of the overproduction against the demand. The demand is great. So they give out these licenses and all of a sudden nobody really knew how much are they going to be able to grow. They're allowed to have this many plants, allowed to do this. They have a permit to do that. But until you have a crop or two and you go, holy crap, we have 165,000 pounds of this weed and we've only sold 26,000. That's a lot of leftover. What do you do with it? So that'll shake out after a time.
Right.
Some of the producers.
This is the same thing that all agriculture industries are experiencing or have experienced. And, the wheat farmers and dairy farmers, they understand this. But the marijuana industry is still, it's not an established industry. It's still very much a fledgling industry. And investors have to understand this.
And I've heard farmers say that, being in the cannabis business as a grower is 100 times harder than any other agricultural, whether you're growing corn or rice or whatever, because of multiple variables. Andrew said you can't write it off your expenses and your taxes. That's crazy.
You got to do business in cash.
You got to do business in cash. You have unbelievable expenses in terms of you have to get a permit, you have to get licenses, you have to do all this shit. You have to have all this regulation in terms of inspecting your crops, far and way above what typical agriculture is. So these costs are going to have to be figured out by the companies. And, the way I look at it is if I'm going to invest in American stocks in the cannabis sector, I'm not looking at growers, man. No way.
No, and we had a guest on not long ago, Cody Sanchez, who said essentially the same thing. I'm not looking at the growers. There's just no money in it. But there's no money in any of it right now.
Although I do believe for growers, maybe not growing, high grade medical cannabis, but I think for farmers, there's a future for growing hemp. I think because there's going to be kinds of between industrial and health and beauty and everything else, all the CBD stuff. It's gonna. That's where the farmers are going to make money.
It's an infinite market, Andrew. Right? I mean, let's face it. Growing marijuana,
don't even know what the market is yet.
There's only one thing you can do with it: make medicine or use it recreationally. Hemp. Oh my God, the uses are endless,
and a lot fewer. Regulatory pitfalls.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, since the Farm Bill, something's happened recently, I've noticed. Since the Farm Bills, a lot of people got grow permits, and they got into it, and they already started growing. And how many different strains of hemp are there? God knows whatever that number is. So everyone started growing all those different kinds of hemp. But some growers, started growing to process CBD oil. So what they're growing looks like just regular cannabis plants that would look like adult use plants that smell, taste, look, everything just like regular high-grade cannabis, but there's no THC in it. And that's what they're processing to get this high CBD oil out of. But now what's happening is they're starting to sell the flower. So the
high CBD flower, you mean?
High CBD hemp flower that looks and tastes like regular cannabis, right? Low THC. So that's sort of a new phenomenon people are out there. And what I'm seeing people do, what I tried, and this works great. Sometimes you just want to smoke something, but you don't really want to get wasted, but you'd like to smoke them, just relax a little bit. But sometimes the weed you get at these dispensaries is just like, man, this high test shit, just one hit, So what you do is you mix it with the CBD flower. And not only what happens
That's a
is
great
since you
idea.
have that high THC, you add a bunch of more CBD and flavors, more terpenes and stuff, and you get a nice it's a more mellow buzz and everything.
Yeah.
And the other thing
Yeah.
people are doing is they're smoking it during the day. Like they'll do it, like they have cigarettes or pre-rolls, and they'll smoke one just for the habit, because you'll probably get a little bit of a body feel from it. It might relate your back. My back, doesn't hurt as much. My neck's okay. My shoulder's
Right.
fine. But you're no psychotropic. You're clear-minded. But then at night when you go and smoke if you smoke regular weed,
Yeah, maybe you want to get a little buzz.
right, your resistance is a little lower than
Yeah.
it was if you had been smoking all the time. Anyway, I think it's a phenomenon we're going to be looking at and keep our eyes on.
Well, I think what you're saying too. We had dinner this week with some friends, and one of the guys, this subject came up of using cannabis, and one of them said, "I can't." One of them who used it a lot when he was younger, I can't do it. It's too strong.
It's
So
too strong.
Andrew's idea, I mean, I don't know that it's solely your idea, but of mixing the two, so you don't have such this incredible potency.
Now, who is telling me that in Europe, almost universally, they smoke it in combination with tobacco?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
And blunts, too. I mean, blunts basically
Right,
weed
right.
wrapped in a tobacco leaf, which I read in an article recently that said that whole mixing with tobacco and blunts is sort of going down. People are going, that's just not healthy. So
Yeah.
that is,
Right.
Well, now this whole phenomenon has, like you said, Jay, has brought the pot stocks. They didn't know the floor would be this low. They're back down to where they started, and I think a lot of you mentioned the tech bubble, the housing bubble, and all that stuff. Just kind of everybody rushing in, and the same thing has kind of been happening with cannabis stocks, and I think I remember back then it was the Fed chairman Alan Greenspan called it irrational exuberance,
Right.
and everybody was like, what are you talking about? Everything's great. Well, take a step back and look at it, and when you look at it from today's perspective. But so, what are we looking for in 2020? And again, I go to one of my favorite stock analyst websites, Motley Fool, and they seem to. And one of the reasons I go there a lot is because they do a lot of research and a lot of articles on the cannabis industry.
Yeah, they really do. They really cover that
much more so than some of the other market watchers, and they have they're kind of giving us what's the pardon the expression, what's the buzz about pot stocks in the upcoming year, and they're citing some trends, and the first one as far as the Canada is concerned, because a lot of these companies are Canadian companies, obviously.
Right.
You mentioned it's 100% legal in Canada. Actually, that's not entirely true, or it wasn't entirely true. Now it is, because the derivatives were not 100% legal before. So,
Right. That's true. Right.
The curtain's kind of been lifted on these. They call it legalization 2.0. That deals specifically with not just dried flower and cannabis oil, but edibles and all the other derivatives and things that we know about. That's going to play more of a role because there is a huge market for legal derivatives, and so we're looking at Kronos Group, Altria Group. Both are very much involved in the ramp up, so to speak, of derivatives in Canada. And, there's so many different ways to ingest cannabis. And so, if we just look at growing and flowers and that sort of thing, we may have been missing the boat. So now that that's legal in Canada, we can see a little bit more market share, a little bit more strength in those markets. The other one, though, is down here in the U.S., what we've been talking about, the CBD. market. The non-psychoactive products, and what role they're going to play. Well, the FDA is trying to kind of put its foot down on this a little bit, which we've talked about this. It is they're
flexing their muscles.
They're providing updates that it can be harmful. Okay, yeah, it's not without its risks, reviewing CBD as a possible additive to food and beverages. They're kind of trying to pump the brakes on this. That's not to say that there aren't companies, who are able to tap this market. One of the first ones we talked about when we first started was a company called Charlotte's Web, and it came from the story of Charlotte Figge, who was
epilepsy,
an epilepsy patient,
suffered from Dravet syndrome.
Dravet, yeah.
Right, which is really nasty stuff. And the CBD oil really, really helped her, and she's leading a normal life now. And the oil that, launched that was, dubbed Charlotte's Web, named after Charlotte Figge. And, they predominantly sell oils and topicals that are not really on the government's radar, and more than doubled its retail presence since its beginning to, over 9,000 stores. It's got products, tinctures. It's becoming a market share leader in the CBD market. So look for more of that, just like we said, and the low THC, high CBD hemp market, and that's going to feed into that. One of the biggest things, though, is what we've seen, especially with Canadian companies, is that they've been way, way overextended. Again, this irrational exuberance. For example, Canopy Growth, which is one of the big ones, has been burning cash at a remarkable rate over the last year, just trying to expand domestically, internationally, acquiring companies. And it's handed out, long-term stock in droves to employees to keep them loyal. And as a result, not only are they burning cash and seeing their profitability dwindle, but they're flooding the market with stocks. And just like anything else, supply and demand.
Yeah.
Too many stocks without the base price and the earnings to back them up. You need to start cutting expenditures. And so Canopy Growth, among other companies, are starting to look at some serious belt tightening. And we can look for more of that in 2020 as the companies are just starting to say, expansion is wonderful, but we need to look at the bottom line.
Yeah, well, I think their philosophy is that, they want to position themselves as being, the big guy down the road as things progress. So investors who feel like they can make it through this first 5 or 6 years despite losses. I mean, it's not unlike a lot of the internet companies that were losing their ass for years. I mean, even Amazon and Google and Facebook and AOL, all of them. I mean, for years, their stocks were so overvalued.
Right.
But for the most part, it paid off.
And those were just a few of the many, many companies that came through at the internet bubble. And so many of them fell by the wayside. And they were the ones that survived.
That's right.
And they had the market share. So I think you're right. I think Canopy is trying to do the same thing. It's just to weather the storm and come out as one of the big dogs. And we'll hopefully they'll be able to do that.
And for their stockholders.
Another trend likely to come up in the coming year is financing concerns for the cannabis industry. Now, this is less troubling in Canada than here in the United States, because given the fact that it's still Schedule 1.
Yeah, right.
And nothing's going to happen with the banking, I don't think. And like we said, you can't run a multi-billion-dollar company on cash basis.
No way.
I mean, maybe you can. I don't see how, though, you can do it for very long. You've got to be able to move money around. You've got to be able to finance your operation. Financing isn't just a U.S. issue, though. You know, Aurora Cannabis, which is in Alberta, in Canada, one of the most popular stocks out there, it really has a reasonably small amount of cash on hand relative to the number of, you know, projects that they're involved with. But you know, the supply has greatly outstripped the demand. And you know, the stock seems to be the only real way of financing a lot of the expansion. So, you know, you've got a lot of stocks out there, and obviously the price of these stocks is going to go down. And then finally, we're looking at just the trust of the shareholders. Now, you may remember Can Trust. It's it sells on the New York Stock Exchange. Dropped a bombshell on the cannabis industry last summer when it was discovered that it had been illegally growing marijuana.
Oopsie.
in unlicensed room for 6 months, and
that was a big story.
The investigation and attempts to cover up. It was illicit growth. It took its toll. It was, and not just on CannTrust, but on the industry.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of trust that needs to be built up among investors. I know that I would love to be able to invest. And man, if there is any lower of a floor to this ground floor, you know, we're waiting to see where the floor is. But, you know, if you bought up a bunch of stocks and just decided that you're not going to look at them for a while and just hold on to them, and hopefully as things shake out, and people begin to trust the cannabis industry a little more for many, many reasons, that those stock prices will begin to go up. But the question is, are those the companies you want? Are those the companies that are going to stick around and weather this storm? You just don't know.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Motley Fool is a good place to go if you're interested in this sector, because they're in my opinion, and this is not a commercial for Motley Fool. No. But yeah, they do cover this sector better than anybody else I'm aware of.
They really do. And I think for a very good reason, and that is because for all the crap that the industry is going in there is pent-up demand, and there is a boom, and it's coming.
It's coming.
You know?
Yeah.
It's out there, and, you know, the market is there. The problem is, like we've been talking about, they just haven't figured out, first of all, how to compete with the black market. They think they can just raise taxes and regulations as much as they want, and people are not going to have any choice. Well, they do. And second of all, it's like I said, it's just a fledgling industry that really hasn't found its legs yet, nor will it until some of this legal reform and some time passes.
So looking back on 2019, Leafly has a great article by David Benenstock, I think that's how you pronounce his name, about the most important cannabis science stories of 2019. So I found this pretty interesting. The first story I'm not going to get into because we've talked about it forever. And
ad nauseum.
Yeah, ad nauseum. And that's the vaping thing and the vitamin E. So we won't go through that. Obviously, that's probably the biggest science story.
We'll get back into that another day.
Yes. The second one is CBD for childhood autism. One vastly unreported study this year looked at cannabis as a potential treatment for autism spectrum disorder, and for the first time produced clinical data showing clear benefits in pediatric cases. The study, published in the journal Frontiers in Pharmacology, included 53 patients with a median age of 11 years old and attempted to gauge improvements across a varied set of symptoms related to ASD after administering a daily dose of THC combined with CBD. Patients showed significant improvement in hyperactivity, 68%. That's huge. 68% decline.
68%. Yeah. That is significant.
And self-injury and rage attacks was down about the same, 67.5%.
That's huge.
That's huge.
That's a common problem among this group.
Yes. Sleep problems is another common issue for autism, and that was down over 70%. And anxiety, almost 50%. So with 75% reporting overall improvement and less than 4% reporting worsening of the symptoms. So this is very significant data.
That's
it's a fairly small group, 53 patients, but still, we're talking about 75% of the patients reporting overall improvement. So that's amazing. The next story is cannabis does not shrink your brain. So we did this story. I think it was a journal, Nature, published a study with a large sample size that used MRIs to examine the brains of 781 youth aged from 14 to 22, including both occasional and heavy cannabis consumers, and determined that neither group showed significant structural differences in their brains when compared to non-consumers. So that's another big story.
All right. I still don't recommend that underage people use it.
No, I agree. And we wouldn't do that.
It's not the death sentence that it sounds like.
I also noticed something that supports that argument, that I see a lot of really stupid people that don't smoke pot.
Just like at Congress. The next story is one last thing before you go, and this is the final one. And this one we discussed too. It's important for our listeners to know every one of these stories were covered on our show. So just saying.
Just saying.
And this is the last one, and that is that we talked about you never should get high or use cannabis before you go into surgery. According to a new study from researchers in Colorado, you may need twice as much anesthetic to achieve the same effect as a non-user. So, in other words, if you are smoke a big fatty before you go under, you might be feeling the whole thing, dude. So you do not want to do that. Do not do that. So those are the 5 top science stories of the year.
Well, you just blinded me with science, Jen.
I know this guy that had surgery last week, and
I know a guy did too.
I know a guy too. As a matter of fact.
Did he blow a big fatty before he went into surgery? I think he
might be sitting on this panel. I'm just saying, but go ahead.
No, but a couple vape hits, just to sort of chill out before. When you're walking in, going, it's a little nervous when you're going in for surgery, for outpatient. It was outpatient. Right. It was just, So I did a few puffs before I left the house. Yeah.
You didn't wake up on the table?
Just sort of, and I walked in there. I was in a great mood. I was joking with everybody. We were laughing, man. I told him my proctologist joke, man. It was great.
Yeah, well,
you gotta love a good proctologist joke.
Yeah, but think about it though. This has happened to me before when I'm coming out from the anesthesiology, from surgery. I'm sort of groggy. I'm just coming up, and I just sort of wake up and I'm talking to like these nurses, and they're laughing hysterically. That's like the first thing I remember waking up, and I'm going, they're laughing at me, not with me. I'm pretty sure. Oh, you think I remember that?
Look at that. Hey, listen, I had a guy that I used to work with that I knew, and he went in for surgery, and he ended up being in the hospital for a while. So he came out of surgery. Turns out, unbeknownst to those of us who knew him, he was having a little bit of a online affair with an old high school girlfriend or something. Comes out of surgery. He's still in La La Land, and his wife is in there holding his hand. Apparently, he spilled the beans, didn't know it, gets out of the hospital a few days later, come home, all his shit's in the front yard. True story. So be careful.
Make your own bed, man. Make your own bed.
That's right, man. Well, thanks everybody for joining us once again. We really appreciate all the folks. Now, we also have gotten a really great response to our Facebook group, and we're so glad that you've tuned in. We want you to do more, so share us with a friend. Go on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating. And what else can they do?
Well, you can send us an email at podcast@VoteProPot.com. We have a message line. We'd love to hear from you. Please call us at 240-257-2441. The number's in our show description. And you can leave us a message and tell us what you think.
Another thing you can do on this coming year is during the election, share with us on social networking or call us our line and tell us about the politics in your state or in your And let's start really sort of singling out, because one of the problems we're going to see in this election are you're going to start seeing wolves in sheep clothing. There's going to be these people out going, I'm definitely for, marijuana legalization. Yeah, 2%.
Yeah,
you got to give up a kidney if you want a permit.
Your firstborn.
We've got to watch out for those people. So when you see those, identify them, bring them up to our attention.
Devil's in the details.
Absolutely. Great idea.
We will share it. There's so much going on. We can't cover it all on our podcast, obviously, every week. So we share a lot on social networking. So go to Linkbook. Is that a thing? Linkbook?
Snapface?
Linkbook.
Okay, yeah. Go to Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter, and do a search for Vote Pro Pot.
Lock me up, find me good, label me a menace to your quiet neighborhood. I don't grow no plants, the state says I can't. That's not freedom. Freedom, that's the point. Smoke a bowl, I roll a joint. Do what I want, if I hurt nobody, that's the point. And if I want to get high, why shouldn't I? That's not freedom. Freedom, that's the point. Decide what's best for you and me. Smoke a bowl or roll a joint. Do what you want, if it hurts nobody, that's the point. So let's get high, yeah, you and I. It's called freedom. It's called freedom, freedom. Oh yeah, that's the point.